Good morning, everyone, both live and virtual. Welcome to the second day of the Summer Institute at the College of Atlantic and on the territory of the Wabanaki people. I'm Suzanne Morse, faculty member and Rachel Carson Chair of Human Ecology, and it is my pleasure to briefly introduce two esteemed graduates of College of Atlantic who will lead this session on the U.S. food system. The two graduates, Chellie Pingree and Genio Bertin. Chellie Pingree, class of 1979, has a long and distinguished career, moving along the path from student and composter extraordinaire to farmer to First District Congresswoman of Maine. And she is currently a critical advocate for agricultural programs and climate change solutions. Genio Bertin, in the class of 1997, farmer and educator, completed his human ecology degree with an exploration of the Union River watershed. And now, together with his wife and farming partner, Sarah Fall, class of 98, has built a vibrant farm and farming community both in Gouldsboro and among farmers in the state of Maine. So in today's conversation, we explore the power of agricultural policy in molding farmers' decisions as well as a potential lever for transforming our food system to be ecologically and economically resilient and socially just. Last night, Michael Pollan suggested that agriculture policy is captured by agribusiness, and we need instead to reward farmers as stewards of the environment and the provisioning of quality calories. Others argue that we need policy to address reparations for Black farmers and Indigenous people. There are many big claims and important questions being tackled through agricultural policy, from soil and human health to international trade. I think it's just time to begin this conversation. So with deepest gratitude, I invite Genio Bertin up to start our session on the U.S. food system with Chellie Pingree. Welcome.
Thanks again. Well, good morning, everyone that's here in Bar Harbor today, that's came, and everyone that's somewhere in the world on the computer screen. It's my pleasure and honor this morning to invite this conversation to begin with Congresswoman Pingree. I've not met Ms. Pingree before, but I'm so excited to have this conversation. I think we share many life experiences similar with the works that we've done on our different farms over the years, and what I have experienced in my 19 growing seasons here off of the Frenchman's Bay right over in Gouldsboro. And so I would like to welcome Congresswoman Pingree to join the conversation this morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Congresswoman. Where should we begin in all of the work that you've done since farming in the 70s to the most work that just occurred on Earth Day with the announcement? Where should we begin this conversation? Where would you like to start?
That's a good question. Well, perhaps we should talk a little bit about the challenges that we're facing today and work backwards. I will say thank you for inviting me here today. I'm thrilled to be on the screen with you. I'm very sorry that I can't be there with all of you. I would far rather be in Bar Harbor than Washington today, or almost any day of the week, let's face it. But yeah, I'm glad to be here with all of you and excited to have this conversation.
So with the movement to, so I guess yesterday I was talking with the principal at our local RSU. We were dropping off some fresh summer veggies for their school program. And that's one of the areas that really interests us, is this continuing effort to try to get the fresh vegetables into the schools and to get the young people excited about eating different things. This, learning to try these other foods, and so that's one of these issues that I find to be inspiring and worth so much effort. And I know that you've been working at that at the national level for a long time.
Sure. And thank you. Thank you for doing that. I think that's a really important way to directly engage young people in thinking more about food, where our food comes from, what it is to eat healthy food. And we have been working on that at the federal level, both from improving the nutrition quality of our lunches, making it easier to procure local food. There have been a lot of roadblocks in the way of even just how our giant school lunch food acquisition program goes. We've worked on some bills lately on food waste in the school to help kids be some of the important voices of both understanding why it's not good to waste food, especially when people are going hungry everywhere in our country. Also, the challenges and damage to the environment of throwing food away in a landfill and letting it turn into methane gas. So it's a really great concrete way both to put healthier food on the table for kids, but also to engage them in this whole process of growing their own food, eating better food, understanding what good nutrition is and how that will impact their health going into the future. And then on the other side, the whole challenge around wasting food, which, as many of you may know, we waste 30% of the food in this country. And if food waste were a country, I think I've seen this statistic, it would be the third greatest contributor to greenhouse gases under sort of our current measurements. So it gives you a sense that this isn't just a passing challenge. This is something serious that we have to take in hand and do something about.
The interesting thing I find with the young people when they come out to our farm for some of these workshops and to help plant, we have a school garden at the farm, and some of the kids really know their vegetables. So it's inspiring that there are some young people out there that really know, and they talk with such passion about the stuff they're growing with their grandparents, or they talk about the other meats that they have on their property, either be it hunting or raising some critters of some sort for home consumption. And those things are really inspiring to me to see these young people doing that. The thing, one of the questions as I kind of was getting ready for this is, all of these years, how have you been able to inspire these different folks down in Washington that maybe have never had this experience or really can respect soil and appreciate these other types of food? How do you make that transition to inspiring the folks that you work with? Question, or too big of a question, but
yeah, I know the concept of inspiring people in Washington is sometimes a sort of a challenging idea, and sometimes we unfortunately get inspired by all the wrong things instead of the right things. But I'll just back up a little bit to talk about actually why I think this is somewhat of an inspirational time, and why I've found more interest on the other side of the aisle than I have in the past, and also amongst colleagues who didn't used to care about issues related to agriculture and food. And so I'll just indulge me. I'll go off for a couple of minutes about this. But, as you know, I was a student at College of the Atlantic, and I was there, in the Earth Day era. And any talk about, organic food or back to the land or sustainable food was sort of a marginalized idea. That was kind of hippie, back to the land, Birkenstock talk. And, and there I was in the 1970s. I was lucky enough over the years to run my own small organic farm and saw the growing interest of people buying food. But it really wasn't until the last couple of decades in particular that, for instance, the market for organic foods just gone off the chart. People wanting to go to farm to table restaurants, people wanting to understand better about their food, and not just in in communities where people have the means to do that, but big chain stores like Walmart are trying to be some of the biggest retailers of organic food in the country. And while we can talk about Walmart or whether or not everything is appropriately certified, the fact that people are paying that much more attention to their food means that this is much more widespread around the country through all economic levels. And it's also not partisan. conservative Republicans want to eat at a great restaurant with farm-to-table food just as much as everyone else. So this doesn't have the same kind of party lines as some of our issues do. So, I mean, I came to Congress 12 years ago, and actually at that time thought, oh, well, everybody will be interested in talking about food and the food systems because it was such a live topic outside of Congress. I did find that there weren't as many people interested, and there weren't even as many Democratic members of Congress who saw the food system as something critical and viable that we needed to tackle. For all the right reasons, we've been focused on healthcare, economic justice, the environment, education, labor, all kinds of other issues. But I've really seen a change over the last decade, and I think a couple of things have impacted that. Again, it's the growing interest in people and the food that they eat, a greater understanding of the toxics in our environment, the relationship between healthy food and healthy diets and our health overall, and the rising costs of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, and bringing some of those conversations together. That brings one group to the table and inspires some passion there with people who understand that. Or sometimes people who have just had a problem with their own health and all of a sudden say, wait, I want to look into what kind of foods I eat. I don't want another cancer scare. Maybe I should try, a different diet. Another part of it clearly has been around the change in markets and the interest that America has in organic and sustainably grown food. And so I've had colleagues from Iowa and Nebraska who never would even have a conversation with me about certified organic food and now say, I live in a big corn and soybean area, but there's a guy down the road who's making a really good living selling organic tomatoes to local restaurants. And I want to understand better how imports impact, his ability to get a good price or her ability to get a good price. So, that has factored in. And then, of course, most recently, as much as we have climate change deniers in Congress, you've probably heard of them, more and more farmers are some of the most impacted segments of our world in adverse weather and the challenges, drought, excess rain, invasive species, just huge problems that they're facing. And so using climate change as a lens, and I have a big piece of legislation related to climate change, agriculture. How do you reward those farmers who are doing the right thing to sequester more carbon in the soil or to make better use of our water, use less toxics, all those things. And I found more bipartisan interest in that than I ever had before, because no matter what, you can't go home on the weekend and not hear from people that they're worried about it. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to help out farmers? How are you going to help out the planet? And then the last little thing I'll throw in there that I think has created enormous change is this horrific pandemic that we have all been through, are still going through. Hope we're not seeing another spike again. But that was a real wake-up call for America on our supply chain, the complete failure of our supply chain. Early on, people would go to grocery stores and see empty shelves, but then watch on TV farmers plowing under fields, slaughtering animals and burying them because there was no slaughterhouse capacity. I mean, just all kinds of things that, weren't supposed to happen in the greatest agricultural system in America, that people didn't realize in their daily lives how bad it was. But then they saw that. And so now we've been able to use the lens of climate change and the supply chain to say, hey, we got to have a total overhaul here. And that has really engaged a lot of members. Some of them witnessed what went wrong with slaughterhouses. Some witnessed, southern Florida, where we buried fields of zucchinis and onions because they couldn't get them through our supply chain to the places that they needed to go, or they didn't know how to market them in our bifurcated supply chain, where most things just go to commercial restaurants, not necessarily into the grocery store. But anyway, without getting too nerdy about it, we've learned a lot. And I actually think we have been able, and I have been able to use some of the crises that we're facing and these challenges that more and more people now see every day and don't think we're making them up, or that we're trying to drive something ideologically because it's our philosophy. Now we're saying we're on the verge of a state of crisis, and we got to fix this. And, that goes back to the most simplest things in some ways. How do we support more people locally? And Genyo, you can probably talk to us about it more, but by all accounts, local farmers found huge demand for their produce and their meat last year because people just said, I'm going to figure out where to get my food locally and stop worrying about the empty grocery store shelves.
That's absolutely correct, and that's actually what I see a lot at the Winter Harbor Farmers Market, is that it's a diverse group that come and shop at the market, probably not think the same way that I do, but many people come because of health issues. They want the local greens that I have available because they're very fresh, and they're trying to improve their diets for their ailments, as well as the getting food that hasn't been touched by so many different communities along the way. And so that was last year. And so many of these people might not have ever have come to the Winter Harbor Farmers Market or to our little farm stand, but now they're starting to see that, oh, wait, there was that sign up the road right there. What are they doing right there? And then they come and like, you have all of this stuff, you do this? And it's like, yeah, we try to do this. And you raise fresh poultry? Yeah, we do. Every Thursday by noon, you can have fresh poultry all summer long. Really? Wow. And then these folks come and they're like, well, what is organic? And I go through the whole process of talking about organic and about the no pesticides or herbicides, but then I talk about that we move, like this morning before I came here, 6 o'clock, we're moving all of the chicken tractors in the field, moving the chickens to their fresh bit of grass for the day's eating. They get grain as well, and there's definitely some supply chain issues that occur with our grain supplies for us here in Gouldsboro. But having fresh poultry, having fresh vegetables, fresh eggs, people are buying it and realizing that there's such a flavor difference. Regardless of anything else, when you get someone that could care less if it was called organic, but then they have that fresh poultry, they never go back. They realize that what was that they were eating before? What is it? How come my egg is so orange? And and that amazement and that wonderment, if you can get someone older to try, is very powerful. In that making sure that we are open at our place to having all different people come and be able to try our food, so that we can get them. So, Shelly, our place, we've always kept it open, and one of our reasons for that is that we wanted people to come and walk the farm and see this crazy thing that we were trying to do, right? We started in '02, pardon me, we brought some horses over and we started plowing fields, and some of the stuff didn't work out quite right in the beginning, but it was a good try. And we're still doing that, but the farm has been open, so we get grandparents who might, on an ideological level, be very different than us, bringing their grandkids because it's something that they can do together. And that, to me, showing the young people what the farm is doing is where the next bit of change is going to happen, and the idea that people can cook their own food and have their food local. The other part that I think about in getting ready for this, and a question I had, is that when you look at the Farm Bill, and you look at it all the time with so many hours of your day, and you look at the breakdown of spending or the budgeting on the bill, and you look at the crop insurance and those sorts of things, that I'm assuming has to be part of this new conversation as we're having climate changing, and all of those dollars and all of these bigger commodities where that comes in. Is that also helping to bridge the gap to have more conversation about soil quality and these other things that might not have been in the wheelhouse of other members of Congress?
Sure. And first, let me really support the idea that your farm is open. I do think that's one of the best experiences people can have if there's somebody who lives, 5 dials down the road from you, or you around, or they're just visiting the area. Just as you said, being able to see how the food is growing, maybe have a conversation with you, that really can change people's hearts and minds in so many ways. And I think we're all hoping that we can have more experiences like that in urban and in rural areas. So particularly important, I think. But the Farm Bill is, of course, a topic that we could spend this entire conversation talking about. And luckily for you, even I don't understand it well enough to bore people for that long about it. But the Farm Bill comes up around about every 5 years. It is our statement of policy, of the mechanics, how agricultural, everything from agricultural subsidies to policies to programs, it's pretty much all in there in so many ways. And so we finish a Farm Bill, and then we go to work on the next one, in a sense. So we're technically the next Farm Bill is 2023. That's the year it needs to get reauthorized. But I've learned after being through 2 Farm Bills that part of what you do in the intervening time is you write pieces of legislation, you propose ideas, and you try to get those moved far enough into sort of the mainstream of our thinking, in a sense, so that in the next Farm Bill you can start to change a lot of policy. I've got things I've been working on through 2 Farm Bills that haven't made it yet. I've got things that got into earlier Farm Bills, particularly programs like LAMP, which is the Local Agricultural Marketing Program, and expansion of the funding for that. So that's really directed towards farmers markets, programs that would assist farmers, just the kinds of things we're talking about today to expand what they're doing on their farm, to add value to the products that they're making and then be able to sell them. But that's a concept that I was able to move earlier. In this Farm Bill, I'm very interested in what we're going to do related to climate change in agriculture. Now, I didn't get a chance to hear, I heard in the introduction you had Michael Pollan as the speaker last night, and he's a certainly a longtime friend of the agricultural system change movement and good friend of mine. And I really, really appreciate his perspective. But the only thing I heard him through you guys that he said was about we reward all the wrong things and we need to do more to reward the positive things. And certainly that's been my goal through the last 2 Farm Bills, and to try to change some of the antiquated policy and thinking around how we support agriculture in America. For those of you who remember the era of Earl Butz back in the Nixon administration, the idea was get big or get out, consolidate as many farms, plant all of America, just become the biggest producer in the world. Don't think about small farmers, get rid of them, consolidate. No more small to medium-sized farms. Don't even think about family farming, really, unless your family is a consolidated corporation that can do all this. Much more vertical integration, just a lot of things that now we're trying to undo, I would say, and trying to do very differently. So the idea of trying to shift from rewarding the wrong things, we made some changes in farm policy in the last Farm Bill. But I think, as you briefly mentioned, a lot of it went into the crop insurance program, which in a sense is a highly subsidized by all of us, the taxpayers, program to cover crop insurance, whether or not that farmer is taking unnecessary risks. So one of my biggest goals is to build the costs of those risks into the program. And one, very easily argued, in my opinion, part of this is what are you doing to improve the soil so that you are more drought resilient, so you can withstand heavy flooding, so that you are increasing your yields by using good practices. So my goal is that the next Farm Bill is a Farm Bill that really breaks through this conversation around climate change in agriculture, that says not only are we going to take the agriculture sector and reduce its impact on climate change, by some estimates it's up to 10% of where we get the carbon in the atmosphere or the damage that's related to climate change. And how do we reduce that? But at the same time, how do we make farmers better partners in this by increasing the support, subsidies, practical education, all the things that we could be doing to help farmers, those who haven't moved into incorporating more organic matters in the soil, ecosystem services, using better practices that don't waste water, that don't lose topsoil. There's a whole variety of things, diversified crops, less tillage, more cover cropping, more use of compost, things that if you're an organic farmer, I'm a certified organic farmer, you do as a matter of course of the practices that we use. But we could do a lot more to remove carbon out of the atmosphere, which is, one of our number one problems in climate change is getting carbon out of the atmosphere and then stopping the practices that put it in there. And farming is a good example of where we could really work hard on both fronts, but by sequestering more carbon in the soil, we have an opportunity to really do some great work over the next 10 years. And a lot of the legislation I'm working on that I hope will become part of the next farm bill, bills that I've already introduced, but the language will probably most likely be incorporated there as opposed to being taken up individually, as separate bills. But that is to look at soil health, to do more research, to change our conservation programs to really reward and require these good practices be used. There's a whole host of things. So the Farm Bill is an incredibly important document, happens every 5 years, but everything that we're doing in between, in a sense, is trying to move ourselves in that direction.
That's a lot. And so what are we dealing with right now? So you've in April, the Resiliency Act came forward, and can you talk a little bit more about where that's at right now? I tried to figure it out, but on Congress.gov, I kind of got a little lost, to be honest. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, and I'm totally sympathetic with trying to figure those things out on Congress.gov or any other website. I'm lucky enough to be able to write down on pieces of paper and then sort of sort out what I've put in there. But I'll just describe the bill. It's called the Agriculture Resilience Act, and I started working on it 2 or 3 years ago because I thought I thought that climate change was going to become an increasing part of our conversation, particularly if we changed administrations, which we did. So we didn't, unlike the last 4 years where we just fought over whether or not it was real, now we are spending our time trying to figure out, okay, we believe it's real, but how do you tackle a complex issue like this? And how does each sector, housing, energy, transportation, how does each one play its role? So my goal was to write a bill about agriculture. I'll just tell you about the 5 sections because it will kind of give you an idea of where I'm going. And, think about it in the context of it doesn't fix everything that's wrong with agriculture, our agricultural systems today, but it focuses on this climate change lens. And it also looks to a certain extent at ways that the USDA could function better and be held responsible for some of the problems that we have to tackle as opposed to the broad spectrum of agencies that also have to deal with this. So the first section is just about research. We have something already called climate hubs. They're a partnership with the USDA and the Forestry Service. We even participate through the University of Maine. But the important thing is it's a place where we take good, timely research on climate change and put it together with practical information that those people working in the field, farmers and others, can use. And so we increase the funding to them quite a bit to enhance that collaboration. University of Maine already does amazing work on the forestry sector in particular, but some in climate change. And then you've got, College of the Atlantic and all of the other great colleges in the state that could be providing research and practical information through those hubs. So we also have a lot of research money for public breed and cultivar research. We're losing our seeds. We're losing so much of the information that we have in the animals and plants that we've grown as we see mass extinction go on, and we need to enhance that research to think much more about what materials do we need going into the future as we go through changes that we can't even predict yet. My biggest section is around soil health because, as I talked about that before, I just see that as the key to both. It's the key to organic farming. Healthy soil gives you healthy plants, and it's really the basis for how you farm organically. But it's also a national crisis in the rate of which we're losing topsoil, and we're losing our ability to sequester carbon in healthy soil. So we actually put performance-based crop insurance discounts in there. And I would like to even have a stick on that as well. But we started with the discounts, but it could be a regulation as well to just tie crop insurance funding, which American agriculture is very dependent on today, to soil health practices. We fund a lot more of what's going on in the states. Maine just passed a soil health bill this year. Many of the state departments of agriculture are way ahead of the USDA. That's no news. That often happens in the states. But going to fund state and tribal governments with grants to look at ways to improve the soil. And also really looks into more of an advisory committee at the USDA to just understand better how soil health and greenhouse gases are tied together. A really important part of the program, our third section, is around farmland protection and farm viability. Every time we lose a farm in this country, which we lose acres every day, we're losing that capacity to use those healthy practices on the farm to sequester carbon in the soil. But most likely we've just developed it and turned it into housing or parking lot or roads. And so we're going to have a net gain of carbon at the same time we've lost our capacity to remove it from the atmosphere. That is also where we put our farm viability information and what I mentioned earlier, the LAMP program. So it's just, hand in hand with protecting a farm is how do you help farmers stay viable? How do you make sure that, every farmer that's going to the winter harbor farmers market, as you were mentioning, can also make that farm viable and earn a good living on it. So that's an important part. The next section is on pasture-based livestock. We have a lot of debates going on about whether or not we should be eating meat. And I sometimes say that, it's easy to just tell people, well, the way we fix climate change is we stop eating meat and plant a tree. And it is very important to have more trees and to keep our forests healthy. And there are many good reasons to reduce the amount of meat that we're eating and certainly to get rid of CAFOs and large scale agricultural production that's doing more damage than good right now. But on the other hand, pasture-based livestock is one way to keep permanent pasture, healthy pasture, which does, a wonderful job of sequestering and holding carbon and keeps us in a much smaller closed cycle there with the role the animals play and the role that the grassland plays. So we also have something in there to protect more grassland going into the future. On-farm renewable energy is our next to the last section, and that's because just in general, farmers pay a lot of money for electrical costs, so doing more to support their ability to put solar panels on the barn or put up wind towers, use small-scale biodigesters to deal with manure on, for instance, on a dairy farm or to accept food waste in a local community. There's some good examples of that going on and even a couple here in Maine. So that's important. And the last one is around food waste. And again, I already mentioned that we waste over 30% of the food in the country. And when you think about that, again, we are not getting food to people who are going hungry. Every time we waste food, we're wasting the food, the water that went into growing that food, very likely in an area that doesn't have enough water, maybe has so little water they shouldn't even be growing food there. The transportation, the average bit of produce you buy in the grocery store, not at a farm stand, probably traveled 7 days to get to you. So there's so much waste when we waste food, and there's so much better that could go on. So very comprehensive ways to look at it, changing date labeling so that it makes more sense when you pick up some food and try to figure out, is this date mean it's expired or it doesn't taste good, or did the manufacturer just put it on there because it means something to them? There's no regulation really in date labeling. So we have a lot around there, and then investing in food waste programs in schools that we talked about in the beginning, because I really do think when young people build good habits, whether it's eating healthier foods or it is not throwing away those foods or realizing that they should have a compost pile right there at school and then a school garden and keep the cycle going. Those are things that you hold on to for the rest of your life. And or you also go home and tell your parents they should do the right thing and stop throwing food in the trash bag. So that's kind of what we're working on. And I guess what I should say back to the Farm Bill question, it's a comprehensive bill. You rarely can write a big bill like that and move it through Congress as a whole. But we take apart sections, and we're working on the appropriations bills this week. So some of the language in there, some of the funding requests I'll get put into the appropriations bill, so we'll already be starting on the pathway moving forward. Some of these I've separated as smaller bills. The date labeling bill is a bipartisan bill I do with a Republican from the West Coast. And so sometimes you can take a little piece and maybe move that forward, or again, get the language in somewhere else. But a lot of it we'll be hoping to use as ways to drive and change the language in the Farm Bill.
There's so much. There's so much there, right? And when we think about Maine, and I think about, so when we got into farming, we were really wanting to do it with horses. So we were even stepping a little bit further back. And so I was going out, Sarah and I were going out and finding farmers who were still doing that in all different places. And one of the, we would end up in Waldo County, or we'd end up in Piscataquis County, and there's some old farmers up there, and unfortunately some have now passed, and talk about their days with their parents and how many horses they used, and their potato harvest or their dry bean harvesting, and how they were so connected to the land that they were on because they could never leave it realistically, but also the distance upon which their crops traveled, right? And that was either the dry beans made it to Exeter, as far as Exeter, or the beans that you would find over down in Hancock County where they were going. And now here, as we ourselves as a small farm and other small farms are starting, we're looking at how do we move our products around within our state. And farmers markets, some folks are using these just other distribution hubs, which basically keep it within the state. But one of the things that was been a challenge for us is that we tried to raise pork for a number of years, and we would buy piglets in, and then we realized that we couldn't find organic piglets readily available here in the state, and so then we decided to get a boar because we're COA grads. We'll figure this out. We got a boar, and we got 11 sows, and we started birthing pigs. And then we all of a sudden became one of the larger pig producers in the state on the organic side. But then you realize, and this is even really apparent last year, is that all of a sudden everyone wants to start raising a few pigs, and then you look at where you can take it. And then you hit the bottleneck, and your bottleneck is your slaughter facility, right? And so because of the regulations which make really good sense to make sure that the product is well taken care of before it goes to the end consumer, how when we look to diversify back to smaller operations, how we help these very intense infrastructure requirements, the slaughter facilities or the grain facilities, how we really start to bring those back in. We have this resurgence of small farms, definitely here in Maine, and I'm not really aware how it is nationally, but here in Maine there is such a push and excitement for these small lands, and especially here in Hancock County. We only have 20% of our soil is tillable soil based on the soil science. And so we can have big farms. We don't need 32-foot combines. We need folks in hand and horse and small tractors working these parts of land here. And so, again, trying to take this small thing that I'm aware of and try to understand it at the work that you're trying to do is somewhat overwhelming. And it's really amazing that you're able to continue all of these years to continue to push these ideas and thoughts forward. And so what is next? So these things are moving forward. These are you're on the chores right now. But what are the bigger fence lines that you're thinking of out there? What's the next project to move forward? Or maybe there isn't any at this point that we need to really focus on what's right in front of you. I mean, I guess, how do you continue to look ahead when you have so much work right before you get to the end of the row, if you will?
Sure, that's a great question, and I want to make sure I mention in case I somehow it gets left out of the conversation later. But I'm so grateful for what you're doing. What sounds like it's almost 20 years now. So what you've been doing over the last 20 years, just to kind of evolve your own operation and to come in and sort of understand. I'm quite sure that at some point our farm bought piglets from your farm, so thank you for that. But, also you've come to understand, like, okay, the issue with pigs is about slaughtering capacity in many places, or the issue for small and medium-sized farmers is viability. Where do you sell? How do you do all those things? And one of the greatest benefits I have in being engaged in agricultural policy, but coming from Maine and representing Maine, which has a huge number of small to medium-sized farmers, where the average age of our farmer is stabilized. It's not going up like a lot of other places. We have a lot more women in farming than other states. I mean, we have a lot of good activity going on in our state. And I'm able to come back to my colleagues and say, I'm not just making this stuff up. This is real. We have, so many small and medium-sized farmers who want to be viable, but who need the infrastructure, but who need, they need this level of support. And if we're not doing it at the USDA, we're missing a huge opportunity to support American farmers. And, the USDA is the entity at the federal government that belongs to all of us and is there to support food, agriculture, and nutrition. And while the movement was to consolidate, support the big guys, get rid of the little guys, there's a great understanding in our country, and it's increasing every day, that people, just as we were talking about in the beginning, want to buy locally. They want to support young to medium-sized farmers. We have to get more young people engaged in farming. Not all of them want to sit on a combine all day, just barely making a profit margin, or be exposed to toxic chemicals, or to never have enough workers, or to have workers you can't pay enough money, or just all the big challenges that we're facing. And while I love nothing more than to kind of look at our food system and agriculture at a 30,000 foot level and look down, I mean, I could very easily, and I know you could too, just say, like, okay, here's what a perfect system looks like. And here's what we do to make sure that everybody has access to healthy foods, and that every farm takes good care of the land, and that we're not battling, climate change and extreme weather. So much of how we fix things, and that I've learned, isn't just by sort of pontificating or writing the perfect book about what the system should be, but it's actually the tedious work of going in there and saying, like, okay, in section 7 of the Farm Bill, could we change this title so that it did actually move the money in the right direction instead of the wrong direction? And slaughterhouse capacity, for instance, as a small but not small matter, is something I've worked on since I came to Congress, both coming from Maine, having my own small farm, knowing that, basically the day the piglets arrive is the day you have to schedule them for a trip to the slaughterhouse, or otherwise you won't get a slot to be able to process them and bring them back to the farm and sell them to your customers. So I've known that's been a problem. I've worked with my closest partner in working on slaughterhouse, capacity of small to medium-sized slaughterhouses, is a guy named Representative Massey from Kentucky. We don't agree on a lot of social issues or other issues when we take our votes, but we're completely united on small to medium-sized farming. He has his own little farm. He lives off the grid, raises his own animals, but he's a conservative Republican. So we've worked on some things to get around the issues related to selling say meat that is slaughtered in a state certified slaughterhouse across a state line, if that state also has state certification. So again, kind of nitty gritty stuff, but we keep looking for ways to empower regulations that right now are sometimes too stringent. And then more importantly, because of the opportunities that we saw during this tragic pandemic, we have a lot more funding at the USDA to do supply chain repair. So we're just sending a letter right now to Secretary Vilsack about how to spend $500 million that he is going to put into slaughterhouse capacity and expansion. And I'm doing that letter with members from Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota. I mean, so we all are seeing some of these same problems, and it really has to do with how do we, support those slaughterhouses that that need to expand just a little bit, but the cost of the regulations are so high, or someone who wants to get into the business, but it's very hard to do on a small scale. What can we do to support them? There's money in there to train more people to work there, because there's a shortage of labor everywhere, but there's a shortage of trained people to work in slaughterhouses as well. So, Maine has pieced a lot of places together, and we've got some really wonderful operations that are working, sometimes struggling to stay available to all of us. But it's back to kind of, to work it into your question, is it's like, as a member of Congress, as one of 435, as someone who's just, in a sense, a cog in the wheel for a moment in time as we try to fix the problems going forward, sometimes you just have to dig in and say, okay, I've got a lot of big picture ideas, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to go to the House of Representatives floor and give the most amazing speech on what the food supply chain should look like and have this all fixed. I'm going to have to do it in the slow person-to-person way of how do I get some colleagues in Nebraska to agree with something that the colleagues in California agree with, and then, work that into a piece of legislation. I'm lucky enough to be on the Appropriations Committee, so I have the ability to even put some funding in the places I want, but I got to make sure that, people understand why I'm doing it, that I can argue my point, that I have the numbers right, and that I can move it forward. So it's just one piece of how we change things. And, someday I'll retire from Congress and write a great book on everything about the food system and why it should be different. But my important role right now is to actually literally be in there with my hands, getting them dirty and trying to change it. And, it's a great honor to do that, but it doesn't always come out as glamorous as, as everything else. But the fact is, we all play an important role. I couldn't do what I get to do unless I could use you and so many other wonderful Maine farmers as an example to say, look, this is a really great part of our state, and it's critically important to all of us. And it's part of what makes our state great. It's part of what makes tourists visit us. It's part of what makes families want to stay and live here. And, so we're all playing this like really critical role.
Well, and I know that you have work to do at 10:30, so I think this is where I'm supposed to offer it up for folks if they want to ask questions, so that you can go about your rest of your schedule. We appreciate the time this morning immensely. But I guess now I'm going to put it out and see if there's anyone that has any questions here within the audience here in Bar Harbor. So, yep.
Thanks so much for being with us today. I didn't get the details on a recent news article or news item saying that attempts to get more money to black farmers had been derailed by a court case. Could you talk a little bit about that if you know more about it? And what's the workaround? How do we get more legitimate assistance to black farmers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we did pass a fairly significant piece of legislation this year to move more monies to black farmers. The record of the USDA, particularly in the South with black farmers, was horrendous, and the discrimination, the misdeeds, the things that were done to cause people to lose their land or it being taken away from them. It's a long and well documented history. Unfortunately, so we've passed that bill. We are also at this moment in time, sort of bumping up against this debate about racism in our country. And we should be moving forward to right the wrongs much more quickly than we are. But not all Republicans, but the Republicans as a party have blocked that in court. And there will be a workaround. The USDA, to Secretary Vilsack's credit, who he himself knew that there were a lot of wrongs that needed to be righted, and I think wants to put the agency on the right track. They're continuing to move forward to construct the program, to design it in the way that Congress intended. But the court case will have to be settled. The only good news is we're not stopping. We're not slowing down. We're going to keep moving forward on it. And I hope that, we're soon able to be in a position where the money can be spent that Congress has allocated.
Congresswoman, you see Congress starting to respond to that. I want to go back to the issue that Michael Pollan raised yesterday, which has to do with the doing less of the wrong things. And I'm particularly concerned about the amount of subsidization of large monoculture crops like corn, which creates high fructose corn syrup, which gets into our diet in a completely unhealthy way, and also that we as a country spend, and probably related to that, spend less of our disposable income than any other country in the world. I think it's going to be difficult to get people to want to spend a larger portion of their hard-earned dollars on their food, although we're seeing that around the edges. But the big central piece of it, to my mind, has to do with subsidization of monoculture crops that lead to unhealthy diets. How do you go about tackling that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I didn't hear the very beginning of it, but I think I understand what you say, and I did, get the gist. And I've heard Michael many times, and he's absolutely right. I mean, that is the only way we can shift our resources to doing the right thing. First, I want to just make a point that will be easily understandable. I know, unfortunately, and that is that there are more interests that lobby and spend more money on lobbying food and agriculture than the defense industry. So I just want to give you a sense that for all the good things that I say and believe that we are, heading in the right direction, the opposition wall is enormous. And as everyone understands, lobbying power in Congress is strong, and changing the status quo is difficult, and particularly for people who represent areas of the country where it's hard to change. When you talk about the subsidies in the Farm Bill, we've done minor, there have been minor modifications in the last two farm bills, and that's why I've been talking about crop insurance, because we don't have as many programs that are direct price subsidies anymore. It is within the crop insurance program that basically you get a guaranteed price. If the price falls, you get the price you were looking for. Bad weather happens, you get the price you're looking for. We understand the bad weather part. The others aren't so clear. And also, the farmer isn't held responsible for any risks that they take. Monocropping, not paying attention to, water retention of your soil, all the things that would improve your yield, you're not responsible for. So it's the crop insurance system we're trying the hardest to reform. And that is where we get the bad money out. And one of the things we're trying to do in the next farm bill is to put requirements in there. Okay, you can qualify for this insurance, but you have to follow all these practices, which would automatically force farmers to use a lot of different practices. And that would be things like crop rotations, cover crops, no-till agriculture, using more carbon in the soil. So that's just a little piece of that, but you're absolutely right. And Michael Pollan is absolutely right. We have to stop wasting American tax dollars on propping up, bad agricultural practices. And you can look at any of the analysis that get done by organizations like EWG and see that a lot of the subsidy money goes to zip codes on the two coasts, and why does all the crop subsidy money go to New York City? Because those farms are being increasingly held by larger and larger entities, not by small family farmers. So at the same time, we've been trying to work on some of these very programs that I talked about, the conservation programs, local marketing of agriculture, all of those many things. And you are right on the fundamental reason, for instance, that there's too much corn syrup and corn products in our diet is because we made that a cheap product. We took all the risk out of it for the farmers. We guaranteed their price. And agriculture just cannot move that way in the future. Not only has that been a bad economic system, it's clearly been bad for our health, and it's now very destructive to our planet. And we have to combine all three of those concerns. One thing I will say that I've spent a lot of time on, and there, again, are many members who have increasingly become interested in this, is the health side that you mentioned. We've changed our it's called SNAP, but our food stamp program, to encourage more purchase of healthy fruits and vegetables. For many people, healthy food isn't coming to their table because they can't afford to put it on their table. And so the SNAP benefit program is a way to help bridge that gap. So one of the program, the double bucks, if you take your SNAP card to a farmer's market, you can actually get twice the amount that's said on your card if you're buying fruits and vegetables with it. We just started another program called Produce Prescription, and that's really to deal with this issue of, your doctor may say, your child is at risk of childhood diabetes, you've got obesity in your family or high blood pressure, you got to eat more healthy fruits or vegetables. But you go home and you say, all I can afford to put on the table are some foods high in carbohydrates and sugar and processed food. So that is actually literally a program that gives you a prescription, which accounts for money that you can take to a grocery store, to a farmer's market to spend more of that. And we're trying to move that into the entire VA system. My goal is to get it throughout the Medicare system, then the Medicaid system. So again, it's a way of leveling out who can afford to eat healthy food in our country, which has become yet one more of the, hideous gaps and divides that we have in our country, who can afford to be healthy and who can afford to get that food that they need. So one more thing that we're trying to do.
Congresswoman, it's getting almost to 10:30. Do you have time for one more, or should we wrap things up?
Let's take one more question. I do apologize in advance for leaving. I have to get, frankly, on my agricultural committee Zoom. So I got to go to my committee.
So we had what? Yes?
Thank you for all your work over the years supporting sustainable farming practices, Congresswoman. I'm a consumer who's chosen to eat organic food, and I've found over the years that the more attention the farmer pays to the soil, the better the quality of the food is. It tastes better, it lasts longer, it's just completely different. And I'm also seeing that recently there's more and more hydroponically grown food that is being marketed as organic. That food never touches the soil. It's basically grown in a factory. So I'm wondering if there can't be legislation introduced to define organic food as food grown in the soil, in the earth. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Sure, it's a great question. Thank you for buying organic food. That is what makes the difference for those farmers who put in that effort, is to have the customers who are willing to buy it. And also, I think for organic farmers, they're on the forefront really of this whole conversation about sequestering carbon. I was lucky enough as a student at College of the Atlantic to have Elliot Coleman as one of my teachers. So think of that. In the good old days, Elliot taught at COA. Now he's still one of the most revered organic farmers, but lesson number one was healthy soil, healthy plants. And to this day, it is really the foundation, as you said. It's part of the language in our organic standards, and we spend a lot of time arguing at the federal level about these standards and how critically important it is to keep them. I am 100% in favor of what you talked about, that there really isn't such a thing as organic hydroponic. It's perfectly fine to grow things hydroponically and say I'm not using pesticides or chemicals or attempting to do it in a healthy way, but it doesn't belong in organic certification. So it's been a debate since I've been in Congress, and we are seeing increasing amounts of foods grown hydroponically. And I'm not going to say that there's never a role for them in urban settings, or that there are times when it's a good way to grow certain kinds of food or leafy greens or all those other things, but it is not organic farming. And so I see it's really important to make the distinction there. So it's 10:31. So while I'm still talking, I'm just going to thank everybody for including me, and really enjoyed having this conversation, with all of you. And thank you for the great questions. It's been great to be on stage with you. So thanks so much for that too.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelly.
Thank you,
Thanks for everything. I mean, am I allowed to say I'm like really proud? Like, It feels kind of fatherly, but like I think really, really excited
No,
that you.
this was a great conversation. I mean, to spend this time with you and be back to the college to do this. You know, we've kept our heads down in the ground for 20 years, just 5 miles across the bay, and to come back and be able to be part of this conversation. It's really, this is human ecology, right? This is not what I expected to do, but when we finally realized that farming was a fundamental opportunity to put human ecology to work and to do all of these different things that Sarah and I have tried to achieve, that's why we're so steadfast at doing this, is because it was driven. Unfortunately, I wish I could take back some of the COA things that we've learned, right? Because then I could just be like, don't worry about it. But as soon as you have that knowledge and you realize and you see the things, how they interact and work, it's very hard to turn a blind eye and walk away. And so that's the hard part. And that's the challenge, is to know when, for your own health sometimes, to be like, okay, this is the best I could do today. But on the other side, to always strive to kind of do better. And that's really what is imparted upon Sarah and I back in the day when we were still here at the college. And we still come around here all the time. I mean, I drive by and I look in awe over at the campus, and we still drop off veggies to different members of the community. But just to know that that COA was part of what really kind of set the trajectory. We didn't know where it was going to go, but the rocket fuel, if you will, totally carbon neutral rocket fuel, was set by COA. So
Thanks,
anyway,
Genio.
that was just off the cuff, but that's a truth for us. So yeah.
That would have been a great public service announcement for the college too. Yeah.
It's lost. I'll never be able to say it again.
I hope Shelly's gone. I know. Okay, good. She needs to be at that Zoom. But I just wanted, first of all, love how things got tied together. And Ron's question earlier was perfect, because at 5 o'clock here under the tent, Leah Penniman is going to be joining us with Courtney Cullum, faculty member Courtney Cullum here. And the title of that talk and conversation is Farming While Black, looking at food sovereignty. And so please come to that. That's going to be really special. And then the last question will come again on Friday when we have Jonathan Webb here talking with Martha Stewart about app harvest and so hydroponics and the organic, non-organic type questions. So that'll be another really good one to come back for. So please tell your friends, come back, and I look forward to seeing you all at 5 o'clock sharp this late afternoon. And thanks, Genio.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yep.